Good morning.
Good morning or good afternoon for you, as it would be.
How are you?
I'm all right. I slammed some coffee this morning so I could wake my brain up enough to do this, and I think we're in a good spot. How are you?
Good thing. First thing in the morning, we're gonna help people build taxonomies and talk data. It's gonna
Okay,
be
we're
awesome.
gonna. I was like, right, like I feel like I need a blackboard right here. Like I need to be able to like draw things.
I was exactly. I was thinking like, how are we get? I wanted to preface this conversation with like, we're gonna talk about something that is very visual
Yeah,
in a verbal way.
yeah,
So it's gonna be very interesting to see what
yeah.
comes of it.
Yeah. No, it will be. It'll be. I guess this is random lore about me, I guess. I have this thing called aphantasia, which means I can't visualize anything in my head. So we're talking about taxonomies kind of the way that my brain has to think about it, which is just like a raw data stream of concepts, kind of.
All right, let's get Mira. Let's go.
Yeah, yeah, right. Uh,
So, hello, welcome.
Hello.
I think for this, I thought of like at least 10 pizza delivery jokes of
Great.
we're gonna teach people how to build a taxonomy in 30 minutes or less.
Yeah.
Uh, to see what's going on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, but I think it would be awesome just to start with probably an introduction, who you are, what you've been doing, why support, and why you
Yeah.
love taxonomy so much.
Yeah, great. Hi, my name is Nick. I'm one of the co-founders of Yetto. We are a help desk built by and for support professionals, people who've done the work for a really long time. I have been in support in one form or fashion or another for the last 15 years or so. I have, in that time, kind of done every support IC job that exists. I've been phone support, retail technician, um, like chat support, email support, engineering support, ops. I've kind of run the gamut. And Yetto is my way of taking 15 years of frustration and trying to solve the problems that I keep getting hired to fix over and over and over again, which leads directly into taxonomies. I spend a lot of time and spent a lot of time early on, like trying to think about why everything felt terrible when I was doing work as like a person, why it felt like the tool itself, my help desk, the way that our ops team worked, like all of that, why it felt like it was constantly trying to slow me down or like frustrate me. And in that, ultimately was like, I feel like I can do this better. And I learned software engineering and I like spent way too much time reading the manual of Postgres database and like trying to understand how all these pieces fit together. And yeah, just like became obsessed, and that leads to where we are right now, where I post a reaction video and then we have a conversation about how to do this.
Which I think is awesome. I think it's really funny because you're like, yeah, like people just keep trying to slow me down, and a point that I would like to eventually get to, maybe towards the end of this conversation, as well as like striking the balance between like, yes, you want to collect really good data, at the same time you want to make that agent experience smooth and friendly, to not actually bog them down with like, yeah,
Yeah,
we want to collect this data, so click all these buttons and figure this out, and then you can send your email,
right.
as a part of that as well. Um, Before we jump into it, the word taxonomy, I think for some people is very, they know what it is, and maybe for other people they're like, oh,
Yeah,
wait, what is this? What does it mean?
yeah,
What is a taxonomy exactly in your eyes, and what's the purpose of it?
yeah. I like to think of a tag taxonomy, and I tend not to use that word for the reasons that you're describing. I like to think of a tag taxonomy as a trellis for making really good decisions. Like if you think of your like all incoming tickets as like this, and your entire support queue is like this wild vine that's growing, like a good tag taxonomy just like kind of binds it to something so that it's easy to make decisions and look back on those decisions and kind of understand the shape of your queue and the shape of your customers as time goes on. And I think it becomes important to think about much earlier than people realize, because it is really hard to fix, but it is easier to kind of like at least start on something simple and build it out over time. As long as the vine is adhered to the trellis, it's easy. But if it's like eating your house, then we have a problem, right?
Yeah, it's if it gets overgrown, then it's definitely hard to chop down, right?
Yeah.
For me, it's like it's my way of understanding the support landscape of really where's the team spending a lot of their time, what are the biggest things that are coming into, and kind of being able to pinpoint those very specific places where, yeah, we have a lot of tickets that are coming in. Okay, like what types of
Yeah.
tickets, which specific
Right.
problems, what can we tackle first to kind of clear the way for really that important work that
Yeah.
you want to spend time on rather than
Yeah.
those crazy things. So that kind of categorization and ordering system a bit. When you talk about, you know, starting simple and not letting it get overgrown to be able to make these decisions,
Right.
one of the ways to start very simply is just create a tag,
Yeah.
right? Just start at least logging what these types of things are.
Right.
And I think a lot of people's first step is to create like a flat tag taxonomy versus a hierarchical structure in that sense. Do you have a preference? I mean, it sounded like you had a preference in your previous
I do.
video.
Yeah. I have a very clear preference. I mean, I think there are two things here, right? The first thing is that especially if you're new to support, right? If you are brand new, you tripped in the door at a new startup as their first support hire because you're a subject matter expert, right? Which happens, right? Like that is a thing that happens. You sometimes wind up being head of support just because you know a lot about real estate, let's say, and it's a Y Combinator real estate startup and you are there. I think, like, first of all, in general, those people don't start by tagging anything. They're just answering questions like as much as possible, and then you've got 6 months of backlog. And when you start tagging things, like, it's very haphazard. I think you don't understand the problems that you are causing until it's too late and you've already caused them, right? My preference, if you've been doing this long enough, I think we think about tagging systems hierarchically, right? Like, I think the image that you shared of, like, you know, big category bucket. My cat is about to walk on screen. Hold on.
It's okay. Mine's also just chilling in the
Amazing.
back.
Like, you know, big category buckets and then topics. And like, I think we generally think about those things. You kind of see the queue as a graph and not like the way that you see like a Gmail inbox where each message is this unique thing. And so I tend to think hierarchically, and I have gotten to the point where I think that you should build tags that are themselves hierarchical, not like hierarchical in combination, but hierarchical on their own, which means you create a lot of tags that are somewhat duplicate over time. But I think the balance that you get there is when you are searching, like, as an agent for applying a tag, then you are searching for an outcome in a way that makes sense to you, and you are applying like a single thing instead of asking an agent to remember, you know, oh, don't forget any of these 20 really important classifiers that all do something different and have business logic associated with them. So yeah, I think about them hierarchically. I think in general, I tend to invert the image that you said, where, like, I think people think of a product area and then they think of like what is happening in that product area. So they'll be like, they won't start with this is a feature request and then add like additional things. They'll start with like, this person is talking about feature A.
Yeah.
The thing that they're talking about is a bug, and the outcome of that bug is that we're not going to fix it, or the outcome of that bug is like, oh, I'm opening an issue right now. And yeah, I mean, for me, again, kind of thinking about what I said about taxonomies, like, I'm thinking about the agent experience in addition to the data, and probably more primary than the data, because you can have the most pristine organization of data in the theoretical realm. It can be this like perfect cathedral of understanding, but if the agent isn't going to apply anything, then it's not going to help you anyways.
Yeah, and I really like what you say about kind of flipping it upside down, right? Because if you have these really, really large areas, And then the very specific tags, when you're talking about the agent experience, they don't need to go in and tag, like, say, for example, somebody's talking about refunds, right?
Yeah.
It's a billing type of issue.
Yeah.
It's a refund. And what's happening with that refund? Did they not get it? Was
Right.
it a partial refund? Was this? So you
Yeah.
have kind of these 3 layers, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, the agent just needs to know it's a partial refund. And then maybe
Right.
they set that tag. But based on that, we know that it's all the rest of the
Yeah. We can add
categories.
the other things. Yeah.
So in that sense, to kind of streamline that agent experience, you find this a little bit of a balance between manual tagging and manual action based on that rep actually seeing and working with
Yeah.
that conversation, because conversations are messy. And then utilizing that to just say, okay, we know, we'll take it from here.
Yeah.
And start to reduce a lot of those manual things that they need to do.
Yeah. No, and I think you bring up a really good point that too few people consider, I think for valid reasons, but the best tag that you can apply, like the best classification system, is one that happens automatically. Like there are far too many systems and far too many support teams that operate at the level of just like individual memory and effort, where every performance metric and every expectation is on like the individual support person to keep the company, your classification system, the customer's issue, where everything lives, just like in their head. And we end up being like really good Google machines, but like computers exist. We can make computers do things for us. And so like there's an element to this where, like you said, you should be able to make inferences, but also you should be able to like apply tickets based on the minimal human effort of your support professional, right? You should be able to just be like, they took, like, I need a human to read the message and take these 2 actions, and from that I can take these 8 or 9 or 10 actions, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think too often we are given a mandate from our leadership, whether that's support or like senior leadership outside of support. And our solution to that problem is just work harder and move faster. And I think that is kind of the silent villain in the background of like a lot of these systems falling over.
Yeah, I mean, you always got to work smarter, not harder, right? In that
Yeah,
sense, like
exactly.
be able to efficiently find a way to continue all these things. I mean, when you reference the image that I shared, which was kind of the vertical hierarchy of like the big category, the area, going back that billing reference, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a billing issue, it's a refund, it's this. Being able to slice that across those horizontal ones when I I put these pillars next to it, like,
Right.
because we want to answer like, what are they talking about? The who, what, when, where, and why of it all, right? Our B2B clients want this. We're a hybrid company at the organization I work at, so we have B2B and B2C clients in that sense. So actually being able to see and differentiate, our B2C customers have this types of problems, or B2B customers are seeing something different and experience it differently as well. But those things don't need to be manually tagged either. So I think finding that balance, again, what you say, like it's really about working smarter and not just really filling everything out in full, because it's gonna take a while. So I think if somebody wants to really get started, like super simply, at least at the very beginning, just start tagging.
Yeah.
And start building it
tagging.
out.
I was gonna say start tagging, and like the big, especially early on, I think the big buckets matter, right? Like if you're literally just starting, you're brand new, first in the door, you have no idea what you're doing, or you've never really like thought about tags, but you've felt the pain of that before. Start really broad and do like, like you said, do like billing, do feature requests, do bug, like the big buckets that you want to be able to look back and find later. And you may have to, for the moment, kind of manually every quarter, every month or something, like go back and read some of those to create deeper classifications, which I kind of recommend until you get a general like support foo about like how this should work, or at least what can be universalized. But then, you're able to understand your queue and your customers, which is really what matters.
And I think the important thing is if you are that early stage, right, you're one of the first people in the door, and you're the person who's also working with those customers. your taxonomy is less of a I need really, really, really structured data so that I can
Mhm.
provide it back into the business. It's more of a guiding kind of compass a little bit of just
Yeah.
here's the general direction, but you talk to the customers every day, so you kind of should know what's going on there.
Right.
Like when we moved to a two layer, so we're slowly building it out as well. So we started as a flat one layer tagging
Mhm.
system. Then we've been in a two layer for about just a little over a year now.
Yeah.
And now we're starting to get to the size where it's like, we might want to drill down a little bit deeper,
Yeah.
and start to build those things out. And for us, for example, like the two layer starts quite well because
Yeah.
we work with them. We're so close to that experience that if somebody says, "Oh yeah, this issue is a refunds issue," you typically know what's going on in that
Yeah.
specific type of a problem. And you're like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, well, we can definitely fix it. And if you can categorize it out into a couple of different ways, then you can just use that as a discovery method rather
Yeah.
than, hey, we have this really, really strict thing. Because if you build too rigid, then it just seems like you're trying to get rid of other, in a sense. And it
Yeah.
doesn't leave any room for flexibility.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, other will always exist. That's one of the things I like that you said in your post. I mean, I like a lot of what you said, but one of my favorite things is I think people too often run the risk of trying to eliminate ambiguity, and in their like fool's errand of doing that, they both drive themselves mad and like lose actual understanding of the queue and like trying to get things done. I used to work at GitHub, and by far, by like large factors of percentages, our number one ticket was not GitHub. It was just people writing in about stuff hosted on GitHub. For those of you who don't know, GitHub is a code hosting platform. Most of the world's code is hosted there. I think I can say that. Um, and so you'd have people having, they're brand new university students having a problem with some open source thing that they're using to torrent movies on or whatever, and they would write angry letters to us and be like, why can't you fix this? How do you release this software to the world? Whatever. And it was, I mean, it was 1,200% more than the first like actual ticket that we would have to answer. And there is no way of classifying that. There's like, it's hard to solve that. You can't
Not
go
us.
out of your way. Yeah, exactly. You just add not GitHub and you reply with, a macro that says like, hey, like this is actually how GitHub works, and that's not a thing. And I think everywhere I've worked has some kind of not GitHub problem. Has some kind of like, you're actually not talking to us, you're talking to our integrator, or like you need to, I know you think this is a problem, but it's actually like your ISP, or, everyone kind of has that. It might not be a multiple of your queue that is like excessive. But you're going to have you're going to have stuff. And also like features are going to be released and you're not going to be ahead of it, and your taxonomy is not going to be planned for it. And you need to be able to, again, look back and kind of understand, where new ground needs to be broken, and where, like I think what you said is really cool, where you've started with this one layer, you move to a two layer, and that works really well. People need less than they think, but they need to be also more descriptive than they think, in those like layers.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Because we have like, yeah, it's sign in versus account activation versus this.
Right.
They're very similar things,
Yeah.
but they're also very different things, or at
Yes.
least like parts of the journey itself.
Yeah.
Just some very closely related ones. I do like that you showed in your video in Yetto that like the descriptions are there while you're tagging, so you can see like,
Yes.
is this actually the right definition? Because when you say, we're building it specifically so we could solve a lot of these issues that people have, one of those issues that I have is that our definitions is completely outside of our help center. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
go learn all the definitions and then become that human Google, like you mentioned, like just kind
Yeah.
of lives there, right? It's hard to keep track.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
And this
that's an
doesn't even
example.
support superpowers, right?
Yeah. No, that's an example of a feature that I fought for and like wanted to see built from the ground up before we talked about any other part of the labels, because I was tired of managing a Confluence doc at every place I ever went, and like onboarding people with like, hi, here's the dictionary, I need you to study the dictionary, you have no context for these tickets, you have not been in the queue every single day, I need you to learn this dictionary, and I need you to like not look too closely at it because some of these won't make sense, right? We call our multi-factor authentication system, we call that 2FA because back in the day that was the common way of talking about it, and now it's MFA. But like, don't type MFA, you'll create a tag that will create a fork that will mess everything up forever.
It's here is this glass cradle of our
exactly,
tagging system. Please don't
please don't mess with it, like, please. But you know, we're asking there's this writer, Cory Doctorow, writer and thinker, and he wrote a really, really good blog post that's just been haunting me for 2 years, where he talks about building reverse centaurs. And what he means by that is like a centaur is like, you know, the best parts of a human being and an animal. So you get like all of this effort, but you also have like human intelligence and like fine motor skills and things. And a reverse centaur is the worst part of a horse and the worst part of a human. And his argument is functionally that we like often build systems that ask people to do the thing that humans themselves are like worst at. And we then have computers do the easy stuff because the human has done this like really excruciating work. And so, you know, like, don't build a system where human beings have to constantly remember extremely detailed, ridiculously nuanced things. Like, build a system where the computer can infer things from like very easy to remember stuff. And the closer that you get to that, the more multiplied your efforts will be.
Yeah, indeed. And I mean, keeping it simple, right? I think it goes what you mentioned, like, people don't need as much as they think they might need to be able to get as detailed of insights as they want to be able to get and want to be able to at least start moving forward. So you mentioned an interesting thing, right? Like, here's the dictionary. Here's the definition of everything. Please don't use a different thing because it will create a tag. And immediately in my head, I was like, wait. So that bugs the question. How much power do you give to reps as you begin to scale to create their own tags versus saying, this is the taxonomy, this is what you get? You can suggest things to be added, or you can add things yourself. What's that kind of freedom look like for you?
So I'll talk about a perfect world, because I have strong opinions kind of about everything, but I have strong opinions here. I think that one of the costliest mistakes we've made as like people building support tools is allowing ad hoc tag creation. I understand it theoretically. I get it. You don't want to cause, you know, friction on something that seems quote unquote as like simple as tagging. But in general, I've everywhere I've worked that has any kind of scale ultimately winds up in a place where like someone has to take a week out of the queue every quarter and go back and clean up all of the tags that are bad and like reapply the right ones to the right thing. And they have to audit and like, oh, this tag should be this now. And now we've got to go do whatever. And if you ever want to just like weep, go through the graveyard of deleted tags in your like in your help desk, right? And that's like a sign that ad hoc tagging is like bad. So my honest opinion is that like the creation and management of your categorization system and the application of that taxonomy should be like completely separate tasks, and the streams should never cross.
Absolutely.
So like, yeah, right. Yeah. So like, so in Yetto, for example, like you literally cannot create a tag from the screen where you're talking to customers. And we went so far as to design a permission system where like the creation and management of labels is its own thing that you can give to specific people and doesn't have to be shared with everybody. And that's very much because like everyone should be able to see the labels and everyone should be able to apply them and everyone should be able to talk about like that. But I think usually you want like an ops person and a couple of managers and maybe a lead to like be able to take action on those ideas and kind of move slower and more deliberately over time.
It needs to come with intention, right? Like actually building the taxonomy itself needs to be intentional and have a direct purpose behind it. And then operationalizing it and changing it needs to be smooth and easy for agents, right? And then it comes to like the purpose of the taxonomy is to get clean data. And you want to plug the sources where that dirty data comes from, and one
Right.
of those things is agents moving really fast.
Yes.
And when you say like, oh yeah, they need to spend a week out of the quarter just cleaning up old tags,
Yeah.
you have super simple things too if you have that, right? Like
Yeah.
you're going through the tags, you see like some people wrote sign in, some people wrote SNIN in because they
Right.
swapped the G and the I, right? It's like it's
Yeah.
just simple misspellings that
Yeah.
cause duplicate tags and dirty data
Yeah.
in that way as well.
Yeah. I'd say that I guess here's a tip for people who are like, I realize this whole discussion is like really theoretical. So like a practical
Practical
way of,
tips and tricks. Let's go.
yeah, like a practical way of approaching this is that like always keep in your mind that like you want really granular data. But the more granular you get, the more you get into like people's subjective ways of expressing things. And it is always better to have less granular data than it is to have bad data. So like if your choice is between having like a really big feature request bucket and someone needing to like read what those feature requests are via even just like brute search of just raw keywords or whatever, and really granular data that is wrong, don't give yourself the granular data that's wrong because you'll have false confidence and reach false conclusions. Whereas like, at least in the really big bucket, you know that there's more work that has to be done to gain understanding there.
Yeah, I think seeking understanding and doing discovery is way easier than having to be like, oh, we made this decision based on this data that was really critical, and it was the wrong data, and now we're in a really tough spot.
Yeah.
100%. So when somebody is starting out, I mean, we had a theoretical conversation around it,
Yeah.
moving towards the much more practical things, right? In that sense, what are some of the do's and don'ts? So obviously, keeping the actual building of that taxonomy completely separate from the implementation, the usage of it.
Yeah.
Don't let people create anything and everything. It needs to be
Right.
intentional.
Yeah.
Any other tips or tricks or advice that you would give
Um,
to somebody who's starting out to build their taxonomy?
yeah, I tend to be there are a couple of ways of thinking about support taxonomy, right? Like yours was very categorical, where it's like we have a big bucket, we have like a topic, we have, you know, you kind of move down. I tend to like problem solution. So what I usually want to know as an ops person or as someone like looking backward at the data, more than even the product insights, which do exist in support, what I want to know is like, what did we do? Like what percentage, oftentimes, especially if we're talking about like headcount and things like that, like I'm trying to understand like how much effort the support team is spending doing specific tasks, and understanding that something was a feature request is like one thing, or understanding something was a bug or a refund to your example. Like that's a big bucket that can be helpful, but like, did we issue the refund or didn't we, is important. Why did we issue the refund or why didn't we? And the closer you can get to not having to read every single one of those conversations to understand that, the better. So I would start thinking, as you think of those big buckets, right? Like if layer one is just super broad categories, I think layer two is, what did you, the support team, do? Not necessarily more information about what the conversation is about, right? Yeah, the I think the urge is to just like add as many tags as possible to understand what the ticket was about. But you kind of don't need to know what the ticket was about. You need to know like how much it's costing your team to do. My favorite example of this is a company I was working at, who shall remain nameless, released a feature that we'd been waiting on for like 2 years or so, and it increased my support queue personally by it was like 2,400%, like overnight. It was really really bad, and I had a meeting with them, and part of this feature was that like it quote unquote just worked, which most support people should be cringing about at this particular moment. Which of course means it didn't work. And there was a button on the back end that usually like fixed things. And so I calculated, because we were tagging things in a way where I knew like we had to push a button, we didn't push a button, we had to push a button, we didn't push a button. I was able to be like, okay, cool. You are currently paying me X thousands of dollars per week to click a button for the sole, like, rather than just giving the button to the customer and like showing them this thing. If you just make that one change, we save like this much money of just my time, much less like everybody else's. And we often don't build tagging systems that like focus on that. We build tagging systems that focus on understanding the customer because we are focused on the customer. So yeah, I would say like problem solution, right? Like if the big bucket is problem, the second bucket is solution, and you can do a lot with just those two.
The visual aspect that's going on in my brain right now, I want to grab a whiteboard marker and like just
yeah. I know, I keep wanting to reach over to my chalkboard and just like start drawing things.
I'm like, this is what we're talking about. This is exactly what you do.
Oh, exactly. Let me think of another. Don't use abbreviations. This is just like
acronyms are
a general rule,
yeah.
right? Like, no, every internal acronym sounds really good because it's less typing, but like you're gonna tab complete anything anyways. So like make it as understandable on its own as possible. First of all, acronyms are going to lead to mistyping, and second of all, like, yeah, just use the descriptive name, and in particular, use the full descriptive name that your company uses in the product. Don't, like, if you call it sign in, then call it sign in. Don't call it login. Don't, like, try to create as little mental diversion as humanly possible.
I mean, especially as well, because if you're onboarding a new person, not only do they have to learn the system, what your customers are talking about, but they also have to recognize this dictionary of a taxonomy and all the acronyms that go alongside it. And then if your acronyms or nomenclature is very similar, then at the same time, it's just gonna be like this thing, this thing, this thing, this thing. So
yeah, no,
it can get kind of wild.
Yeah, well, and I think that like that you want to this is true not just of taxonomies, but of everything else. You want to minimize the amount of oral history a new person has to learn, right? Like support, our onboarding is like very, I'm going to call it primitive. And by that, I mean like, or archaic, I think is a better,
it's tribal knowledge
word. Yeah, right. It's we all kind of sit in a circle and go like, oh yeah, so you don't know Mark. Mark used to work here, and Mark named it this thing, and we just all live with Mark's choices now. And like that's
don't be like Mark.
Don't be like Mark. Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. Like it's you want to kind of minimize the chances for that happening because you live with that forever. Like every brick that you put down in this wall of your support system stays, and if it's a rotted brick or if it's broken in some way, like it messes you up. What else? I think another practical thing is, and this is more for like tenured support folks. Some things are universal. Don't assume that all things are. Like, don't show up in like, if you are often, like, you're a really tenured support person, you're showing up and the founders have been doing support, like, up until the moment that you walk in the front door. Which means the support, like, help desk is a mess if it exists at all. There might be tags, there might not be tags. They might be doing very, very weird things. And the tendency to just kind of go, I know what I'm doing. I've done this for 10 years. I'm going to impose a taxonomy that works everywhere, like on this system, and then everything will work forever. Like, you've just become Mark. You've just caused this problem, and you've kind of built a system where you're going to force your customers into a mold of every customer you've ever worked with before, rather than kind of understanding this customer and this company and this person's support needs. So as painful as it is, and as much as we kind of want to mentally autocomplete a taxonomy and get to where, you know, the utopia that we want to build as quickly as possible, like, start small and start deliberately and start with those big buckets. Even if you think you know what layer 2 is, like, start with those things and move from there.
Yeah, 100%. Because one thing that you do at one company will not always be the same or exactly the same as another, especially if you're changing industry. Like, if I think about SaaS companies, then it really does come down to product and feature, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the actual, like, thing that they're doing in that system. But if I think about, you know, a luxury brand that sells, clothing or purses, it's
Yeah.
very different in the types of things that you're going to get and what that bill looks like. For
Yeah.
us, or at least in my organization that I work at now, we're an e-learning company, so it's not necessarily SaaS, but it is a
Right.
lot more types of things that are uh, varying outside of products. So for us,
Yeah.
we do, is it platform? Is it billing? Is it their account? Is it their
Mhm.
membership? It's not product A or product B or product C.
Right.
What works for one may not work for another, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And also like
I love that piece of advice.
resolutions. Yeah. And also like resolutions are going to look different, right? Like maybe you have a really strong, we often think of support as being very close to product or engineering, but there are plenty of companies like e-commerce where you live under is like sales, and you should, because that is the primary function of the organization, right? You should be like very close to those people, as much as that pains a lot of us to hear. And what resolution looks like in a sales driven organization is going to be very different than what resolution looks like in a product organization, in an engineering organization. It's going to look different based on the level of like technical ability of your customers, right? Like my bias here is that I have spent most of my career working on developer tools. And that means that like I operate with an assumption that like a significant amount of my queue is stuff that like these people have to do for themselves, that I can't do for them, for like liability reasons, right? Like if an agent at a developer tools company is writing code for your customers, like you have opened a Pandora's box that no one should ever touch. Um, whereas like in e-commerce and I'm sure e-learning and other things, like just doing stuff for the customer is like probably pretty normal. And so yeah, like you're gonna want to think carefully about like who your customer is. There's no such thing as like a universal customer that kind of always has the same needs and interacts with your support team in the same
It's
way.
Mark.
It's Mark. It's always Mark.
Yeah. No, it needs to be tailored to your needs. I think that goes for anything customer experience, really. Like,
Yeah.
and I think that's what makes support so unique in that way as well. Is like, yes, we will take a taxonomy or a structure
Mhm.
or this type of knowledge architecture and knowledge management as a building block. Like we'll always
Yeah.
have these building blocks itself, but the way in which you construct the full picture and the full structure
Yeah.
will look wildly different,
Yeah.
even though the blocks are still the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing is, as you're thinking about the big buckets, as you're thinking about like maybe where you've got the big buckets in place, you have like broad understanding of the like pie chart of your queue and where your effort is going, and you're moving on to layer two. Think about your like company's goals with its customer, and start creating your second layer based on those. Because oftentimes I think support falls into this. This gets into metrics, which is another hobby horse of mine. So I'm sorry to kind of like
Another
run.
conversation.
It's a separate conversation for sure. I'll be angrier for that one, I think. But we often fall into this place of we measure CSAT and then we assume that like that is all our responsibility and not a reflection of like the whole company and its goals, right? And we also, in measuring CSAT, tend to measure like 8 or 9 things that all just ultimately come down to like the human effort of the person and not necessarily like the outcomes that they're creating. And we individualize that, right? We end up in a place where it's like, I know how each individual person is doing, and like in theory that means I know how my team is doing. But at the end of the day, like you need to know what your goals are, and you need to know how much give room you have to not meet those goals, like how many errors, how many times you can mess up in there. In engineering, it's called an error budget, right? You know what your error budget is, so that you can make conscious decisions to let things get worse in the short term, so that in the long run you can fix your classification and you can have those conversations and you can build things, and your taxonomy should be built to make that stuff easy. Right? If engineering is saying that they want like one of their goals is, or product or whatever, that one of their goals is like this amount of seamless onboarding, then you should probably start thinking about a resolution where like you can measure whether onboarding was seamless for this customer or whether they're running into a problem, and you can calculate that as part of your contact rate and like help them understand that like they're actually not meeting their goals even if number go up on the chart that they have that doesn't include support, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And also, for example, if you do have a really good relationship with engineering and product, if you're, building that relationship, as you mentioned, it depends on where you sit in the
Yeah.
organization and what those
Yeah.
goals are. We use, for example, escalation tags, like
Mhm.
how many tickets do we actually need to escalate, and can we keep those escalations down by doing agent training or finding out
Right.
the actual root cause of the problem
Yeah.
that we need to be able to, am I spending hours and weeks clicking this button
Clicking
that
a
the
button,
system
right?
should
Exactly. Yeah.
do?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's important. I think, escalation tags like you talk about, um, I guess maybe a place we should have started is all of this is going to be limited on your tool.
Yeah.
Right? Like your tool is going to define a lot of what your imagination can do, like how you can solve these problems, and you can get add-ons and things like that that like help solve these problems. But you want to know your tool pretty well. In general, I would say I've worked in a lot of tools. I've worked in most help desks. I'm building one, so obviously I'm biased and have opinions here. But most custom data in a help desk ultimately ends up being a tag at the end of the day. Like anything useful, if it's other custom fields, text boxes, whatever, like you want to resist the urge to reach for those as much as humanly possible, because they are not actually useful when it comes to like searching, understanding, filtering the queue. In most cases, there's just a lot of caveats there. When it comes to automations, like adding a tag, removing a tag, that's going to be the most reliable way of like understanding when something should happen. And so for things like moving away from classification tags and into like action tags, let's say, you macro tags are an example I think you've mentioned, where like a tag is applied or removed on automatically just based on the macro taking action. And escalation tag for like we escalated it. Therefore now we can look back and like see these things.
Yeah.
My preference there, this kind of goes into the balance of like speed, right? My preference there is that like you want to infer as much of those tags as possible based on like the 2-layer system that your people are applying, or 3 layers, however many layers you need. If you have to apply additional tags, you want those to be like as invisible to the agent as possible, because I think all of us have been in a situation where we've opened just a gnarly ticket and looked at the tags, and there's been like 80 of them in there, and we have no idea like what is going on in this
What is
conversation.
actually happening here?
Right. Yeah. Like no tag was removed, only things were added, and we've like taken action on those things. Like you want to try to clean things up as much as you possibly can.
One of the decisions that I made with the team very early on when we were starting to build this structure is which feature of the tool do we want to use for what part. Because we have custom fields like properties that are actually like drop down select and things like that versus tags, and those are 2 different features in the help desk that we're using to be able to collect that more standardized data. And we decided we will use custom fields to collect structured data. That way it is standards and we're getting clean data.
Yeah.
And we will use tags for 3 things. One, so like the actual tags themselves. One, visual clarity. So it's our action-based tags and our workflow-based tags, where if I'm looking at the full queue that's like a full stack, I can very quickly see kind of what's going on. I can see what's the biggest category thing that I'm going to have to deal with here, or what's the priority of this, so that I can hit the biggest priority tickets first,
Yeah.
or something like this. I have it as a SLA, so we have a nice rainbow showing what's an SLA and what's not.
Nice. Yeah.
Then we have automation tags, which are, we try to make as gray and as invisible as possible. Limit the distraction a little bit because it takes away from that visual clarity, but it's necessary for us to trigger, smooth operations. And then the last is like ad hoc one-off things. Like if we have a major incident, we're not gonna create an entire category and section in our taxonomy for major incident. It's this, but we will just use like a incident. Hey, it was this very specific thing that happened, and we can say like, hey, this incident caused X volume of tickets or whatnot at the same time. I think making those kinds of decisions, but that will then again be one of those mark things. We made this decision because this is the tool we had. We're off that tool, so now we need to make different decisions.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, migration is an entire other conversation.
Seems like we got a series going.
We do, yeah. We just gotta let's talk about operation stuff forever, because I like to say that like I have no other use for this like decade of knowledge at this point. I just have to like help as much as I can. Yeah, I mean, like my solution to kind of get all of those areas you're talking about are like completely and totally valid. I will say that like my preference as a person working the queue for the last 10 years or so mostly is like, if you make me take my hands off the keyboard to accomplish a task, I will haunt you for the rest of my life. Like that is my that is my like North Star as a human being.
I need to keep my actions per minute up. All right.
Yeah. Just like let me keep my hands on the keyboard and enter a flow state and just vibe through everything. Like that'll be, I'm already expending so much like empathy